afternoon. My name is Remark, and I'm the host of Catching Quokkas. For those of you that don't know what quokka is, and I only recently discovered them, they're actually named the happiest animal on the planet. They're cute, they're cuddly, they apparently love selfies. So if you go stand next to one, they'll come and have a selfie with you. But most importantly, they're in our own backyard. They're Australian. And in that vein, that's what this show is about. The idea of this stream is to be able to share some really great stories of Australian emerging tech companies doing some amazing things globally that nobody really knows about. And I'm thrilled to have with us today the CEO of an Australian crypto company called Clanz. Before I do that, I'd love to understand a little bit about where you all are from. This is a live stream through LinkedIn, so please share where you're from, say hi, give us a shout out. But also, if you've got any questions, please feel free to keep your questions coming along. Before I introduce my first guest, I'd like to warmly acknowledge that I'm hosting this stream from Sydney, Australia, the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And with that, I would actually love to introduce the first guest of our Catching Quokkas series, Dr. Michael Kolo. Oh, I know you like that tune, Mike. Thank you so much for being here. I know you're flying out to the US tomorrow, so a busy man. But thanks again for joining us.
Oh, no, thank you so much, and thanks for the introduction. So cute, cuddly, and local. Yeah, I know most of those are true. I'll let you work out which ones exactly. Yeah,
exactly.
But yeah, that's exactly right. So heading out to the US tomorrow to catch a very exciting conference on blockchain called Consensus, which is going to be held in Austin, Texas, and a big contingent of Australians are going, Australian businesses, a group together from fantastic work from Blockchain Australia and others, to create that community and to send us over there. So really looking forward to meeting a lot of that community and businesses that are all kind of huddling together, I suppose, in Texas for this conference.
Oh, so much fun. Well, Mike, you and I had the privilege of working with you the last couple of years, an Australian quokka. And, I'd love to hear a little bit about why you've kind of moved into crypto. Tell us a little bit about your pivot and what made you kind of go into the industry.
Yeah, look. So my background is in finance. I spent a lot of my career in London. Probably can tell from the accent. I grew up in Perth, and then I moved to London quite early on, and my accent shows it. So I spent a lot of time there working in finance, in asset management. I did my PhD and kind of had a career in institutional asset management. But as part of that, I became super fascinated by the impact of technology on people, on industries, on the world, and so on. And when I got to the ripe age of 40, I decided that this was a great thing that I kind of, had a part of my career that I had accomplished certain things in. And now I really wanted to pivot. I wanted to do something a little bit different and really move myself forward and to challenge myself a bit more than what I was doing. So what I ended up doing was joining a startup, which we worked on together, which is a fantastic quokka called Fathom. And that was a wonderful company that is looking at the impact of automation on people and the workforces around the world. And so that was a fantastic way to understand the impact of technology on society and societal effects of that technology in terms of automation. And that was a brilliant adventure to be on together, actually, to explore that topic. For me, as I kind of went on to my next adventure, which was at Clanz, I also became very interested in the role of blockchain in our industries and our technologies. So blockchain, you'll find many different videos on this. So I'm not even going to try to
break it down, Mike. Break it down. In the simplest.
30 seconds to break down what is blockchain. Well, okay. So I think there's a realistic answer to that question, and there's a kind of slightly flippant answer. The slightly flippant answer is if I were to tell you about concrete and the concrete on which your house stands on, you probably get it 30 seconds into the conversation before you were bored and moving on to some other topics like how the doors and the windows and the color of the walls and so on. I think Blockchain is a little bit like that. It provides an amazing infrastructure that data sits on and is shared on, and is able to be visible and moved around and transacted and recorded, and is immutable and impervious to things like fraud and manipulation and damage and so on, which is incredibly powerful as a way of enabling a lot of things to be built on it. So it's a little bit akin to me saying to you, we built a new kind of concrete and it can hold a 6-story house rather than just a 2-story house or something like that. And you'd be like, wow, that's really cool. But I think blockchain, in terms of its ideal, it's also around the idea of democratizing data. So rather than data being stored in one place or controlled by one entity, even if you love that entity and you trust it because you think the government's great or your bank is great and so on, because I think in Australia mostly that's true. If you live in other countries where it's less true, or you don't really think that those institutions are great, blockchain provides incredible transparency and access for others to access their data. And so it's such a powerful technology that it's not only had just record amounts of money flowing into it from VCs, but also enormous amounts of human capital. The amount of really, really smart people from all around the world that have gone into this space is ridiculous. It's kind of like looking at finance in the 1980s or 1990s, where everybody was like, I'm going to become an investment banker. And all the brightest minds were like investment banking, Goldman Sachs, whatever else it is. Now it feels like this sort of similar type of thing that's happening. We had AI maybe about a decade ago, and now we've got for blockchain, people from Uber, from Amazon, from all these different facets of life are flocking into this space because they see the potential of the things you can build on top of blockchains, i.e. on top of the concrete block, as well as the concrete block itself, to really rewrite the way that industries are shaped and managed around the world.
Yeah, and I'm we hear a lot more in the industry around blockchain and crypto. Has the impacts of the last 3 years created this surge that we're seeing now?
Look, I mean, it's an interesting point. So I want to separate very quickly between blockchains and crypto, because people kind of say to them in the same sentence, and they are very related, but from a technical perspective, but from a conceptual perspective, they actually are quite different things. I think blockchains, they are a sort of a fundamental input into industry in terms of the way that industry uses information, data, creates products, thinks about healthcare, think about insurance, think about hospitality, think about any number of these things that uses data, and that uses data to create things. So the way the blockchain is, therefore, it's about accessing that data and using that data. So nothing to do with Bitcoin and whether things are going up or whether the monetary policy of the banks are doing whatever they're doing. And so therefore, blockchain at its kind of more fundamental beating heart is about that value proposition that goes into those industries. And then there's a very closely related concept, which is this ledger system that's also created, which allows you to put on a value and put on assets onto the blockchain, and therefore trade those back and forth. And that has a very large speculative component. So let's put the cards on the table. A lot of people that trade Bitcoin or related entities are doing so because they're trying to get quick wins. They're trying to make a quick buck. They're trying to see what they can kind of, Bitcoin to 60,000, 80,000. Nobody knows quite why it should be exactly 80,000, but it's going to go forever. But the theme behind a lot of those ideas is there's a kind of resistance to centralization. There's a resistance to government and to bank control. So there's a little bit of that anarchist feeling to it. But equally, there's a lot of really interesting applications where you can tokenize value and have that value traded. But as we know from financial markets, as soon as you start to trade something, it starts to behave in a potentially much more volatile way. The animal spirits take over and so on. And so I think that the last couple of years has seen a big rise in blockchain and not only blockchain, which is the economics, the fundamental movement, but also the rise of crypto. I think partly because online gambling has seen a big rise as well, right? People have had more time and money on their hands. But I think the other part of this is that the amount of money and the amount of talent that's going to the space are just creating a massive ecosystem that people can trade. I think there's like 10,000 coins and tokens around globally right now. I think before the recent meltdown we've had, it was close to $2 trillion worth of AUM in terms of the total size of this. I think the amount of volume that's been transacted is enormous. So it's a really interesting place, but it's one that's rife with speculation, and it's one that it's a little bit like a wild, wild west at the moment. So I think we see that getting a lot more institutionalized and a lot cleaner and a lot neater over time. But at the moment, it's definitely wild, wild westy.
Yeah, got it. And what made you specifically, like, what was interesting for you to move into that? And we've got a question coming up soon.
There you go. So for me specifically, okay, so I mean, I guess I saw the potential in blockchain and I saw the potential of the different applications. And somewhat selfishly, I saw how my talents or my skill set could fit into that. So I think realistically, whenever you see something that's growing and great, that's wonderful. But then you have to look at it and go, why am I going to be good at that? Like, what's my role to play?
Yeah.
And in my case, as a research-minded person who comes from an academic background, I love analyzing complexity, and then I love kind of transforming it and communicating it and kind of taking people on a narrative and a journey and so on. And I saw a lot of very technical people in blockchain doing a lot of really interesting but complex things. And then I saw this other side, the broader community and the broader society, trying to say, what's going on over there, guys? Can you please tell us what's going to happen? And then the engineers on the other side, well, we've got this network thing. And so, I was like, okay, great. I think I can build that bridge. So for me, it was very much, let's go into this space. Let's start building that bridge. Let's get people using and adopting the benefits of digital assets and ultimately for investment purposes and to kind of be part of this whole change in industry and this whole change and movement in industry. So I think for me, it was very much that alignment of what I perceived as my personal value add. Like there's always something that you're 9 out of 10 on. Most of us have something. And this notion of, okay, can you fit that into what you're seeing happening?
Yeah. You're specialist in the generalist. I love it.
Your superpower.
Yeah, superpower. I love it. And you have many. So the fact that you selected it down to that. But, I think the question that's come up from Fab is similar to kind of what you were discussing about, the talent that's being brought in from Uber and some of the other industries. Are you seeing that there is a drain, particularly in Australia? Like where is all this talent going at the moment?
I think like any other industry, AI being another classic example of it. Whenever you have a highly technical industry that starts to flourish globally, clearly the salaries go up. And so that attracts people, especially people coming out of university who have less family commitments locally, to say, hey, let's go to the US primarily. In some cases, let's go to particular parts in the world. I think where crypto, so it's very interesting. Blockchain is finding its home at the moment in Florida, in Miami.
Right.
And to some extent, it's finding its home in Texas. I think all the technology is increasingly in Texas. They've done a really good job of attracting talent from Silicon Valley and the Middle East. So UAE and countries like that actually done an exceptional job at facilitating the same way that they do with AI as well. They just put a lot of money into these high-tech areas in order to diversify their economies. I think countries like Switzerland have also done a really nice job to make it attractive. But ultimately, you need, with all these kinds of businesses, some scale, and then you need some kind of regulatory help and some government help in the background. I mean, Australia's been decent, but again, it's hard to compete because what happens, for example, with the Americans' culture is if I were to found a American company, the requirement I have is to go into a VC or PE pitch and to say how we're going to take over the world.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it's not kind of true or it's low probability event, high outcome. That's what they want to hear. They want to hear the big picture. Whereas in Australia, I go in there and say, well, we're going to build a nice business and it's going to gradually ratchet up and we're going to make sensible decisions. And people go, great,
organically.
Money. And so the difference between the two is in one case, I can pay $500,000 for a head of sales who's just going to, superstar, blow everybody away. And if they either fail or succeed, well, the VC kind of carries that money. Whereas in the other case, I'm going to ratchet up and I'm going to try and beg, borrow, steal resources, people's time. And we're going to sort of start to slowly move up until we kind of get to a bigger place. So it's a very interesting, I've seen a lot of Australian startups, not just in Bitcoin and crypto or blockchain, but in a whole bunch of other areas, kind of can try to compete against this kind of much more aggressive American model. And they struggle because if you can throw a lot of money, then you can hire the best people, then you can make that true. You're much more likely to scale
and fulfill that pitch, right? Yeah, got it. And so I guess that's an interesting point. Like how are you seeing the Australian economy supporting like the businesses like Clanz? Like some, we'll go into Clanz and a little bit more about the idea behind your offering, but how are you finding this ecosystem in supporting the Australian crypto startups or scale ups more so?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's wonderful communities. That are in existence at all different levels of seniority. And these are kind of community building things. So ones that, for example, Mark Monford will run or Steve from Blockchain Australia and others. they're great communities, and boundless others in locally distributed across Australia. So as a group of individuals and people, you have a fair assortment of weird and wonderful people, because after all, it's still blockchain. So you've got very different levels of skills and backgrounds, and it's like a
Yeah.
mixed cowboy saloon. It's a bit like when you walk into Star Wars and you've got the different aliens kind of sitting around, and you're trying to work it out. But I think from an Australian perspective, regulation is something that is we welcome and we're looking forward to, and we have responded. There was a question actually from Senator Andrew Baggs, around what we could do to contribute to understanding the space better, and lots of people in the community have contributed to that. I think the
Yeah.
Australian government will likely go forward with an agenda on how to regulate. We look forward to that because we think it's a first step to adoption, certainly for financial institutions, advisory groups, and so on. They're looking to give advice in the space. That's going to be really, really good. I think that on the crypto side, we're seeing really good developments on custodian kind of risk and various other considerations that were necessary to solve in order for people to feel secure. But from a financial perspective, I guess there is R&D grants, which are really helpful for people like us who are doing a lot of work on that space. I think perhaps one of the things that we are missing a little bit, and this is, for example, a great credit to South Australia, who did this for AI and Amazon and so on, is that notion where the government doubles down and goes, this is one of the industries that we really want to support, like, for example, space or hydrogen. And therefore, we believe blockchain is one of those ecosystems that we want to do. So we're going to provide free office space. We're going to provide a little bit of help or administrative support, R&D clawbacks, anything else like that. Access. Austrac have been great, as well as just connecting us and seeing what it is globally. So I feel like there's many pieces on the table, and perhaps sometimes the challenge is to say, right, if you're a blockchain business of any kind or crypto business of any kind, come through this program and we'll kind of introduce you to all these different services and familiarities and so on. But we've had a good time, we've had a friendly time, and yeah, we look forward to more.
Hopefully there's a lot more that our government and our market can support. Mike, I guess related to the question that's coming up around talent, right? You mentioned that a lot of the good talent, you have to spend a lot of money in getting in. What for those of our audience that will either live streaming or will watch this later that want to get into crypto, how hard is it to get in? How hard is it for, as a leader in this industry, to hire this talent that you're looking for? What would you advise for someone that wants to get into this space?
Well, and if you're ever wondering, ladies and gentlemen, what great talent looks like, look no further than Ramak right here. But I think I have to give it back to you at some point. I think that's a great question, and it really does depend on what you're trying to do. When it comes to software developers or development resources that are specific to blockchain, that are specific to building these things, I find that actually the community is pretty jam-packed with people who are interested in projects and who are engaged. So from a engineer's perspective, unlike, let's say, traditional company that's trying to attract that talent and going, my God, how do I get these people? Because they just don't want to hang out with me. I think this industry is pretty good with that, because of the community, because of the sense of new and different. I think what's really challenging is actually finding people that can communicate products well and sell. And I think this is where the next phase of this, at the moment, there's a lot of money being poured into this industry to build and create products, some of which have product market fit, some of which don't, some of which need to be pivoted and so on. We certainly paid a lot of attention to trying to make sure that we're product market fit. But when it comes then to going out there and talking to people about it, whether that's retail, wholesale, institutional, having that narrative and that message, it still requires sales and distribution folk to have a certain technical understanding of as to why digital assets and blockchains and smart contracts and so on. So if you try and hire from a traditional base where somebody says to you, I've got 4 or 5 years of experience in selling funds or selling investment solutions, you will probably likely have to train them up pretty much from scratch, and they will demand a fairly good salary because they're coming from financial services that pays well. So fintech always has this problem that whenever it tries to create a financial product, it has to hire from some degree of expertise in that space. In this particular case, I think it's probably an additional level of tech as well. So certainly what we've done to combat that is just a very heavy educational program and overlay.
Yeah, yeah,
And we're fortunate that we're still relatively small, so we can maintain that. But I think as we grow bigger, there'll be sort of more questions about distribution teams, sales teams being really closely aligned and closely trained on why this asset is amazing, why this asset is so different, and to be able to answer a lot more of the
yeah.
technical elements.
Yeah, I can see how that's really important, because when you are selling something that is technical, and it is, I mean, there's a lot to it for someone that's not in that world, you would need to really be able to simplify it in a way, to make that proposition very clear. So for all the sales folks out there, crypto is a very good industry to get into. That's good to know. That's good to know. So let's deep dive into a little bit about Clanz, because I really do want to understand a little bit about Clanz. What's your vision as the CEO now for the business? Where do you see the business going, and what, maybe in the next 2-3 years as you're planning forward, where are the opportunities?
It's a great question. I mean, crypto is a very dynamic space. So I want to say everything that normally when you do startups and you're kind of leading these businesses, you
Yeah.
have a 90-degree cone that you're thinking it's about there. I think in crypto it's maybe some 120 or something like that, because you kind of have less visibility. There's a lot of uncertainties around various elements. But I think there's a couple of really, really powerful trends that we've observed and we built our thesis around. So one of the trends is that this space is a superior technology. Blockchain offers a superior technology. Digital assets are a superior technology to what we have currently in the market. So in some form or shape, they will be integrated into financial assets and asset management. And therefore, the future is one of digital assets.
Interesting.
It doesn't have to be just Bitcoin. It doesn't have to be Ethereum. It can be a whole range of other, not only digital tokens and currencies that provide utility, but it'll be increasingly tokenization or digitalization of existing asset pools. So we think that this trend for institutional adoption that we are seeing globally from across the board, so any major asset manager that you care to name, Nomura, I think, came out a few weeks ago and said they're going to hire 100 people by 2024 in this space, are building capability right now. They're building trading capability. They're building infrastructure, institutional grade infrastructure. So if you think about add these two together, you have a big institutional sort of adoption. So the why now is very clear. You've got this future that it's a superior technology. So it's a sustainable adoption and sustainable for long term. And then you add in together these notions of the unique risks around cryptos, like we saw recently with Luna, or that we see with collateralization, or that we see with liquidity pools, protocols, and so on. And what you end up at is a industry that is going through a lot of change, that is growing like crazy, and requires expert financial intermediation. So what we did with Clanz is we started to move the business from where it originally was kind of positioning itself, which was more of an exchange and a creative exchange with copy trading and elements of different things, to an investment platform where we will be giving people access to different kinds of investment strategies that are curated, that are well understood, that have very well-defined risk parameters, very clearly defined investment goals, but also themes behind them as well. Because part of the reason you want to invest in this space is because you get excited about the metaverse, you get excited about DeFi, and the revolution that these things could bring to different industries. So we want to capture that enthusiasm, and we want to capture it within the confines of this kind of well-structured product set. So we're really looking for that institutional products. We're looking to take advantage of the scaling and the adoption curve and the long-term trends as well. And we think that the world will be very, very different in the future. We think digital assets will create just an unparalleled level of autonomy for asset classes to operate through smart contracts and move around between people, and the way that it measures value, the way that it behaves, will kind of provide different kinds of risks, different kinds of outcomes as well for investors. So the world is very exciting. It is very different way of thinking about it. And we think it warrants a very different type of perspective. So that's the reason we've decided to push Clanz in that direction.
I love it. I love it. Sounds really exciting. We've got a question come through, and it's an interesting one, right? Like we've got there's a tough economic climate at the moment. A lot of companies are out there now that are really, particularly in the SaaS space. I'm seeing it myself that every day you go out 10% cuts, and there's going to be an economic recession coming in the next 6 to 18 months, maybe. How is it going to impact your industry, particularly in that crypto space?
I think it's a great question. I think it's so a couple of data points for us here. We're in the midst of a bit of a micro crash, right, in crypto terms. Since November last year, Bitcoin is up 55% ish. And that's not great. So when you look at that as a headline, you think, right, so what's happening with the industry? In the background, VC money, I think the last 4 quarters has been about 33 billion. It's more than any other 4 quarters. So there's tremendous amount of
Wow.
investment and people going into this space, although the headline numbers seem that it's down. When you put that in context of what happened with technology stocks, you start to see the fact that, yes, all tech stock is down. The NASDAQ is up 35, 40%. Microsoft, Google, I mean, at some point, Netflix was down 75%.
Yeah.
So you have from November last year, you've got this massive reversal in tech because of COVID that shot up prices. And amidst all of that, Bitcoin and therefore all of the other coins are also caught up in that tide, essentially. And that's the reality is that Bitcoin is behaving like a small tech company, and a lot of the
Mm,
other coins there as well. So if you kind of picture it on the landscape of financial assets, not as a stable currency or digital gold or anything like that, but statistically behaving like a risk-on asset with a beta of about 2, which basically means it's a small cap, in this case, a tech kind of industry type function. Yes, it's absolutely very sensitive to the market, but it's also very sensitive to industry movements. Now, the question with recession is a really interesting one. Clearly, all industries get affected by recessions. I think the one way to think about your career in these cases is where are the technologies that are either necessary for life or superior. And so you either move your career into working for food retail, or you move into career into elements like quantum computing, where you're like, no, that's coming, and for sure it's going to be better than what we have today. And I think about it very much the same way with blockchain, whereas and all the crypto spaces, there's a part of it that's speculative, and that's absolutely fine.
mm,
There's a big part of it that's going to be growing and integrating into these industries. And then I think the final point about this is that it's really important to understand the source of recessions. So in this case, we have high inflation, and this is a much longer conversation, but I'll give you the quick 2-second version. We
yeah.
have we have high inflation, we have rising interest rates. So we have the stagflation, the double whammy that everybody was trying to fear and avoid. But a lot of the reason I think personally that we have the problem with inflation is because of supply chain. So the rising interest rates not really solving the problem of increased demand; they're just pushing down demand even further. The supply chain issues will kind of prevail, which basically
Yeah.
means that companies with specific dependencies on transport, gas, and also supply chains, aka manufacturing companies, aka
Mhm.
consumer discretionaries, technology, hardware, will absolutely suffer shortfalls and won't be able to sell their products, and will be kind of lagging, and their revenues will take a hit, and so on. Technology doesn't suffer from this problem. Your Netflix doesn't have a supply chain; it just appears, right? So if you've got a broadband, you're fine. So in terms of like, it's interesting to ask, well, how will technology fare through this kind of recession,
Yeah.
where more the supply chains are broken, so lots of things that are related to that start
Yeah.
to kind of draw on the economy. I personally think that with technology or technology level applications, it escapes much of that. It still captures the sentiment. If the market goes down 20, technology goes down 22 or something. But overall, in terms of the economics of it, I think that most of technology, again, the software part of technology, importantly, will kind of fare okay through that. So again, if you have a broad-based sell-off, you can't escape it. As a general principle, try to find companies that are well-funded, that have a superior technology, and have prudent leadership that have a plan B.
Oh, I love it. I love it. That's very good advice. Really good advice at now. I get asked that question a lot. So thanks, Mike. I know we're coming close to time. What, one thing that you want to, kind of want to leave us with around the work that you guys are doing? I'd love to get your insight into what the future of Clans and
Yeah,
what you're trying to achieve.
absolutely. And maybe I'll kind of position this as slightly different. I mean, Clans as a company, I think is a wonderful example of an Australian entrepreneurial company that's seen a trend, global trend, not a local trend,
Yeah.
and it's trying to innovate and move into that space and bring that innovation into the Australian ecosystem. I think the other thing I'd leave your listeners with is a little bit, I suppose, on my journey personally, which was a journey about going through a very rigorous academic background, thinking that I know what I wanted to do, going
Mm,
through a career, and then at 40 thinking, I'm not sure I'm heading the right way. And that realization then, in my case, it was probably one of the biggest pivots of my life, where I took a back step from that role and went somewhere else. And I think for lots of people in my peer group and others who are afraid, who have children, families, mortgages, etc., and who are a little bit afraid of chasing your dreams or
mm,
seeing where the world is going, I guess my strong experience from my personal life is I've never been happier. I've never been more focused. I've never been more ambitious and more driven, because I'm kind of, I suppose, I'm integrating with where the world is going. And in this case, it was at the beginning, it was AI. It was the adoption of AI. That's still a fascinating topic for me, and ethical AI. But now it's a little bit more on the blockchain side. And maybe in 5 or 10 years, when we have a conversation, it might be something else. But this idea of adopting to the world and what the world needs from you, and kind of being, I suppose, a little bit fearless about finding your way to that over time, rather than being locked into a particular story and a particular narrative that has been
Mm-hmm.
created for you, especially as you get later and more experienced and more senior in your life, I think is really important. So as a final point on this, I'm going to Texas. And it's going to be fantastic, but there's going to be a room full of 20-something-year-old people. I'm 33. And I'm going to be like, "Ooh, yeah, party." I mean, but it's I'm of course, this is not, for them it's going to be their first big rush and the first big industry, and we're going to change the world and so on, and I'm going to support that and be really positive and enthusiastic and draw on that energy. But I'm not, I'm allowed to be in that room. Like, we're all allowed to be in that room, and we're all allowed to be optimistic, enthusiastic, and really get passionate about what our future holds, and so that you can write the most interesting autobiography you possibly can at the end of it all. Like, that's clearly has to be the motivation.
I love it. I love it. I would totally read your autobiography. I reckon you could write one now, actually, to be honest. All right. Well, we got one last question. What makes a person Clanz material? So what do you look for when you're and this is a good one, right? For anyone that wants to get in, like you said, that wants to be in that room. What do you look for when you're recruiting?
So I think it's a great question generally for what all companies, small companies like startups and whatever, want. I think there's probably two main characteristics which are probably less advertised, but just as important. One is resiliency. So resiliency means that you can be driven and motivated, and you have a sense that you're learning something from this experience. And then proactivity. So for example, people that we have on staff who've got 10, 15, 20 years of experience in banking, I still want them, whether they're my leadership team or others, to be making proactive decisions, to be going out there, to be showing passion, to be doing things. And the resiliency is extremely important, because any company like this goes through ups and downs, goes through good times and sad times, goes through hopeful times and depressing times.
Yeah.
But this notion that you show up at one of these companies with a CV and you say, listen, I think you're going to need to do some marketing, for example. I think you're going to need to do some serious digital marketing based upon what I've seen of you and your website. I've got a couple of ideas. Let me just come and sit with you for a few days for nothing, just to kind of go through what I have with you. So it's not an employment contract. It's not an interview. It's a show me what you've got. And once we see that the person is spirited, that they're engaged, that they're interested in this space, we try to pull them in, because we're a community. We try to say, listen, we might have a project for you, might have part-time. We might be able to give you a piece of work and pay you for that piece of work before we kind of go through the whole to the whole element of it. But that proactivity, where you start to think, gee, I wonder what they want from me. I wonder what would make this business fantastic, immediately aligns you to their thinking, and immediately means that you're bringing proactively a piece of paper about what will make the other person happy, rather than what normally you see with people bringing a piece of paper saying what makes them great. So if somebody turns up with a piece of paper going, I'm great, I, as a CEO, now need to think, okay, how do I make this work for me? Is the bridge I need to create in my mind or for my business? Whereas if the person can come with me at that bridge, that's automatic, like a sort of a load off my shoulder and a calorie that I don't have to spend doing it.
Yeah, I love that. So bring value from to the table right from the beginning. Yeah, because a lot of people might not be able to spend 3 days, but they might come up with these suggestions. And I've had a lot of people that said, oh, they've asked me to do presentation during the interviews, but I don't want to give my IP away. I don't want to give my secrets away. Whereas it's bring value, show them the value that you can bring.
And I think it's also it's interesting that there's an Australian cultural element that means that people want to show up and say, look, I know my material and I'm just good, so I'll work it out. But I think what is even more powerful in these cases, if you come in and say, I can show you how you're going to win.
Yeah.
So I have a conviction that says, I think I figured out a way for you to win, and this is it. And It's not about IP because it's non-specific. You can't take that pitch and take it to another company and another company because it's different. So as soon as you come to that company and say, "Listen, guys, Clans, you guys are too purple. I think you can win by being blue," or what else it is, and just the fact that you have conviction and you have a push, and then we can see how that is going to materialize into value. Companies like us are very close to our cash flows. Like we are monitoring it month by month, week by week. We understand where we are. We have fiscal discipline. We are prudent. We're careful. We have backup plans, etc. When we bring somebody into that fold, into that circle, we have to have a sense that that person is going to add value. They're going to represent us well. They're going to bring us in a very straight line into revenue. If you're one of these people that goes, "Oh, I'm just a generally a good person," how can I kind of come up with, well, take it one step further, or maybe a couple of steps further and say, okay, look, tell me exactly how you're going to bring and how much you're going to bring and over what time. And what do you think is that one killer argument that we're missing that you can bring in? Again, you don't have to be right. You just have to have a conviction that you're willing to test and try something. And then I think we'll get you noticed, that will get you in front of anybody in this space who's kind of searching for how to grow their business, how to move things forward.
I agree. We're looking for people that have solutions, not with people that come with problems, right? Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Mike. Super helpful. I think we're at time. I could go on all day speaking to you, one of my favorite people in the world. Honestly, I can't thank you enough for being our first guest in Catching Quokkas. And I wish you and the Clanz team all the success in the world. For anyone that has questions for Dr. Kolo, you can add them in the chat for later on. We'll make sure that he gets those and he responds. For any questions for myself, please feel free to, again, comment. Love to hear about, how it was, what you want to see on the show for future episodes. We'll hopefully have a lot more. But in the meantime, I wish you all a healthy and happy day. And Mike, have a safe trip to the US. And I look forward to seeing you all on the next stream. Bye for now.